The pilot fainted at 34,000 feet. No warning. No sound. Just silence. Then a quiet woman from seat 19A stepped into the cockpit and spoke her call sign on the radio. Far below, two F-18 pilots froze. Every fighter pilot in the fleet knew that name. Comment your country below, let's see how far this reaches. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. Her name was Sarah Coleman. She was 39 years old. She was flying from Seattle to Seoul, a long night flight over the ocean. She was not in first class. She was in economy, seat 19A, next to a man who was already asleep and a teenage boy playing a game on his phone. She had a small bag under her seat and a jacket that looked older than it should. Nobody on that plane knew her name. Nobody knew what she used to do. To everyone around her, she was just another tired traveler trying to sleep through a long flight. It was almost midnight. The cabin lights were dim. Most passengers were sleeping or half asleep. Outside the window, there was nothing but black sky and black ocean. The flight had been calm for the first 3 hours. Sarah had eaten a small meal, read a few pages of a book, and closed her eyes to rest. She had no idea that in the next few minutes, everything on that plane was going to change. In the cockpit, Captain James Riley, 55 years old, was flying his usual route. He had flown this same path more times than he could count. Beside him sat First Officer Mia Torres, only 3 years into her career as a commercial pilot. The flight was smooth. The radar was clear. Everything looked normal. "Nice and quiet tonight," Mia said, checking the instruments. "Let's hope it stays that way," James replied. He reached for his water bottle. He rubbed his chest once, then again. Mia noticed but said nothing at first. Pilots are trained to watch before they react. She kept her eyes on him for a few seconds. Then James leaned forward slowly. His head dropped. His hand slipped off the controls. "Captain?" Mia said. No answer. "Captain Riley?" She touched his shoulder. Nothing. She pressed the emergency call button at once. "I need help in the cockpit. Right now." What Mia did not know was that at the very same moment, the plane's navigation system had quietly picked up a small error. The autopilot was drifting off its correct path, just slightly, because the captain had not confirmed an earlier alert before he collapsed. It was not dangerous yet. But if nobody fixed it soon, the plane would slowly drift off course, and the fuel numbers would stop matching reality. Mia had 2 hands, one working radio, and no one beside her who could fly. She held the controls steady, but her fingers were shaking. She had never flown alone over open ocean at night. She had never handled a medical emergency and a flight problem at the same time. The lead flight attendant, a man named Daniel, reached the cockpit within a minute. He saw the captain slumped in his seat and felt his heart drop. "Is he breathing?" Daniel asked. "Yes, but barely responsive. I need someone up here who can fly this plane." Daniel already knew what to do. It was part of the training, even if nobody ever expected to use it. He walked to the front of the cabin and picked up the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your flight crew. Is there a pilot on board? A licensed pilot, please press your call button now." Silence. He waited. Nothing. He walked down the aisle, asking passengers directly, row by row. First class, nothing. Business class, nothing. He moved into economy, still asking, growing more worried with every empty row. Then, in row 19, a woman quietly raised her hand. Daniel reached her in seconds. "Ma'am, are you a pilot?" Sarah looked at him. She had already felt something was wrong. She had felt the small shift in the plane's movement before anyone said a word. "I used to be," she said softly. Navy pilot. I flew fighter jets. I haven't flown a passenger plane in years, but I know how to fly. Daniel didn't wait. Can you help us? Please. Sarah was already unbuckling her seatbelt. She stood up calmly, walked up the aisle, and stepped through the cockpit door. Inside, Mia looked at her with wide eyes. Who are you? My name is Sarah Coleman. Former Navy fighter pilot. I have thousands of flight hours. I can help you fly this plane. She sat down in the empty seat beside Mia and looked at the instrument panel. Her eyes moved fast, scanning every number, every light. You have a heading error, Sarah said calmly. The plane has drifted off course. We need to fix this now, or the fuel numbers will be wrong later. Mia stared at her. How do you know that? I've seen this before. Let me help. Together, they carefully moved Captain Riley out of the seat. A doctor traveling in business class rushed forward to check on him. Sarah sat down in the captain's chair. Her hands touched the controls for the first time in years. For a moment, everything felt strange. Then it felt familiar. Her training had never really left her. It had just been sleeping, waiting for a moment like this. She picked up the radio. Control tower, this is Flight 218. I need to declare an emergency. Our captain is unresponsive. I am a former military pilot taking temporary control of this aircraft. I need guidance for an emergency landing. There was a short pause. Then a calm voice answered. Flight 218, understood. Please state your name and background. My name is Sarah Coleman. Former United States Navy pilot. Call sign, Falcon 7. The radio went quiet. Not busy. Just quiet. Then, far away on a different frequency, a voice broke through, not from the tower, not from any commercial plane, but from a military channel that had crossed over onto the civilian band, as sometimes happens over open ocean. Did she just say Falcon 7? Another voice answered, stunned. Falcon 7 is flying that plane. It was two F-18 pilots from a nearby carrier group, flying a routine night patrol far below. They had heard the call sign clear as day. For 3 full seconds, they forgot their training completely. Every pilot in that fleet knew the name Falcon 7. It was a story passed around training rooms and briefing halls for years, a pilot who had once flown her damaged wingman safely home through hostile skies without asking anyone for help, without ever wanting credit for it. Hearing that name now, on a civilian frequency, over the middle of the ocean, felt impossible. Sarah heard the exchange but said nothing. She kept both hands steady on the controls and her eyes on the instruments. There were 214 people behind her. There was work to do. Down below, in the cockpits of those 2 fighter jets, the pilots sat frozen for a moment longer than they should have. One of them, a young lieutenant named Ortiz, gripped his controls a little tighter. He had heard the name Falcon 7 only once before, during a late-night briefing years ago, told by an old instructor who lowered his voice like he was sharing something sacred. Nobody had ever confirmed if the story was even true. Some pilots thought it was just a legend passed down to make young aviators believe in something bigger than fear. Ortiz never thought he would hear that name spoken out loud, on a real frequency, from a real cockpit. His wingman, a pilot named Reyes, broke the silence first, though only inside his own helmet. That's not possible, he whispered to himself. But it was. The voice on the radio was calm, steady, exactly the way the old stories always described her. Neither pilot said another word on the open channel. They straightened their formation, refocused on their patrol, and let the moment pass in silence, the way real pilots always do. But both of them knew they would remember that night for the rest of their careers. The story of Falcon 7 had started 16 years earlier, during a night training mission off an aircraft carrier. Sarah was 24 years old then, flying an F-18 alongside her wingman, a pilot named Lewis. Halfway through the mission, his electrical systems failed. He lost his radar. He lost his ability to communicate. He could still fly the plane, but in restricted airspace at night, with no way to identify himself, one mistake could turn deadly. Sarah made a decision in seconds. She flew her aircraft close beside his, wingtip to wingtip, so close that radar would read them as a single identified plane, her plane, the one still broadcasting a signal. She stayed there for over 40 minutes, guiding him home in silence, absorbing all the risk herself so he would not fly blind and unmarked through dangerous skies. When they landed, Lewis told everyone what she had done. He said she had flown beside him like a ghost, protecting him without a single word. The name stuck. Falcon 7 became a legend whispered through training rooms for years. Few pilots knew the full story. Most just knew the shape of it, a quiet hero who had never asked for recognition. 2 years after that mission, Sarah left the Navy. It wasn't her choice. Budget cuts and a difficult senior officer made her position no longer necessary. She didn't fight it. She was tired of carrying the weight of a name she never asked for. She simply wanted to fly, quietly, without the noise of being a legend. She spent the following years flying cargo planes across difficult routes, through storms, through remote airports, through long nights nobody envied. She kept her flying skills sharp even as her official certification quietly expired during a busy year when she forgot to renew it. She always meant to fix it. Then her contract was cancelled unexpectedly, and she found herself on a passenger flight to Seoul, in seat 19A, holding a cup of cold tea, going to visit her sister for the first time in 3 years. 40 minutes into her emergency flying, Captain Riley was stable, but the doctor said he needed a hospital fast. Not in 3 hours. Now. What's our closest option? Sarah asked. Mia checked the map. Anchorage. We can be there in less time than continuing toward Seoul. Sarah keyed the radio. Control, requesting immediate divert to Anchorage. Medical emergency on board, deteriorating condition. Divert approved, the tower answered. Heading 290. Emergency crews will be waiting. Sarah nodded to Mia. You handle navigation and checklists. Call out everything, even if you think I already know it. I want every step confirmed. The descent began. Sarah moved the controls with slow, careful precision. The plane doesn't care who is flying it. It doesn't care that her hands hadn't touched controls like this in years. It only responds to steady, correct movements. She talked quietly to herself the way she used to during long solo cargo flights, saying numbers out loud just to keep them real. Passing flight level 290. Descent steady. Mia handled the radio, coordinating with air traffic control, calling out checklist items one after another. Sarah confirmed each one. Runway lights slowly appeared through the windshield, small white dots turning into a long, solid line. Gear down, Sarah said. Gear down, confirmed. Flaps 20. Confirmed. The runway grew closer. 500 feet. 400. 300. Sarah watched the approach lights carefully, adjusting the descent with tiny, precise movements. At 200 feet, the runway was no longer just lights, it was solid ground rushing toward them. She pulled back gently on the controls just before touchdown, easing the nose up for a smooth landing. The main wheels touched the runway together, one solid contact, no bounce. She reduced power, applied the brakes, and slowly brought the massive aircraft to a controlled stop. The intercom clicked on. Daniel's voice, calm but full of relief, "We're down." The cabin erupted into sound, people crying, people clapping, people hugging strangers beside them. Passengers who had felt something was wrong but didn't fully understand what, finally let go of hours of quiet fear. Sarah didn't hear most of it yet. She was finishing the shutdown checklist, step by step, the same way she always had. When it was done, she sat back and looked out at the airport lights. Mia turned to her, eyes wet. "We landed it." "You landed it," Sarah said. "I just helped." "I was terrified the whole time," Mia admitted. Sarah smiled softly. "So was I. I just didn't stop." Paramedics rushed the captain off the plane within minutes, already stable enough to make a full recovery. Passengers slowly walked off, many not even realizing who had truly saved them. One elderly woman stopped at the cockpit door before leaving. She looked at Sarah and said quietly, "Thank you for not letting us fall." Sarah simply nodded. "Thank you for trusting me." The investigation began that same night. Officials asked about her lapsed certification. She answered honestly, without excuses. "I knew the risk. I also knew 214 people needed someone who could fly." The airline's safety director reviewed the flight data personally. He found that the navigation error which had built up before the captain's collapse had never triggered a proper alert, a gap in the system that Sarah had caught and corrected within minutes of sitting down. Because of her quick action, the aircraft avoided a serious fuel problem that could have turned into a much bigger emergency during a difficult final approach. Weeks later, Sarah was offered a full-time position with the airline, Director of Flight Safety Standards. Her certification was reviewed and approved within a month, once officials read the full story of what she had done. Somewhere far out over the Pacific, two F-18 pilots sat in their squadron's dining hall, scrolling through a small news article about an emergency landing in Anchorage. A former Navy pilot. A safe landing. 214 lives saved. Neither of them said a word. They didn't need to. They both remembered those 3 seconds on the radio, the moment they forgot every rule about staying silent on the frequency, the moment they heard a name that every fighter pilot in the fleet had grown up hearing. They both knew exactly who Falcon 7 really was. And they both knew that after all these years, she hadn't changed one bit. Captain Riley recovered fully. Months later, he flew again, on the very same Seattle to Seoul route. Before departure, he asked that Sarah be told personally. She sent him a simple message, "Welcome back to the sky." He kept that message saved for the rest of his career.